a field jacket in the snow, a wheelchair carving thin tracks along a silent bus depot. Inside a sagging cardboard box, 3 German Shepherd puppies lay blue-lipped and trembling, left to fade before the town even woke. No one stopped. No one believed a door would open for them. But a Marine who had already lost his legs remembered what it means to never leave anyone behind. He turned toward the hospital, toward a word called hope. What happened next will make you cry and believe in second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments, and if you believe no person or animal should be left in the cold, hit subscribe. The morning over Riverside, Colorado, came on like a hush held between 2 mountain breaths. A dull pewter sky pressed low over the Front Range, and last night's hoarfrost sugared the chain-link fences and the weeds that pushed through cracked asphalt. Wind combed the empty bus bays of the old depot, making the metal signs creak and clack, as if the place still remembered schedules and voices. The town had not quite woken yet. The coffee trucks were only just rolling their rattling generators to life 2 blocks over on Harper Street, and the first commuter cars moved like slow fish through a gray river of cold. Jack Turner coasted along the depot's perimeter in his wheelchair, shoulders working with a practiced rhythm, breath a small ghost in the air. 38, clean-cut hair the color of bark, face lean and winter-browned, a faint white seam of a scar running from the jaw up under the left ear where shrapnel once said its name. He carried himself the way old oaks carry storms, still, and a little bent, yet stubbornly alive. He wore a Navy watch cap and a field jacket that had seen better deserts, gloves with the fingertips scuffed from gravel and brake rims, and the expression of a man who had learned to keep a private fire lit behind his eyes. Jack had been a U.S. Marine before an explosion peeled the ground out from under him and switched his future off and back on in some new direction. The chair had become part of his silhouette, black aluminum and carbon ribs, spoked wheels that caught the frostlight, a machine he drove like a second body. He talked little, smiled with the corner of his mouth when he did, and kept a dry humor that he spent sparingly, the way one spends a last match on a long night. This loop around the depot was a morning ritual, equal parts therapy and liturgy, push, breathe, turn, push, breathe, turn, until the rhythm settled the noise in his head. That was when he heard it, a thin, threadbare sound, less than a cry and more than a tremble, the noise a living thing makes when it is almost done with trying. He braked, listened, and the wind fell away enough for the sound to stitch itself to the air again. Not a cat, not a bird, something soft and sapped of breath. The depot lot was a map of neglect, sleeping bags abandoned under the loading awning, a shopping cart full of dented cans, a cantonment of cardboard in the lee of a graffiti-bitten retaining wall. Jack pivoted toward the wall, rolling over a patchwork of bottle caps and the glitter of safety glass. He did not hurry so much as focus, the way he once did when the NVGs washed the world in green, and the smallest flicker could be a tripwire or a moth. The sound came from a large box whose once white sides had been soaked to the color of old tea. Duct tape held the top in a sloppy H, one corner crushed as if a boot had tested it. When the wind breathed, the flaps quivered and a sweetness rose from the cardboard. A warm milk ghost trapped in cold air, smell from 1,000 kitchens, but here it had the wrong address. Easy, Jack said, though there was nothing yet to soothe but his own heart. He peeled the tape, one careful whisper at a time. The lid came free and the cold world shifted. Inside, 3 German Shepherd puppies lay in a knot of shiver and silence, 6 to 7 weeks old if his memory for working breeds still served. They were marked like small versions of night, with dawn stitched on. Black saddles with tan drifting down the legs and cheeks. The largest was a dark sable male with a broad forehead and paws too big for his future, his ears trying to stand like a broken salute. The smallest, a delicate female, wore a faint white coin of fur on her chest like a secret medal. Between them, a round-eyed pup with a mask darker than the others, the bridge of his nose dusted with a charcoal smudge, lay breathing in shallow feather strokes, as if the air were too heavy to lift. Their coats were damp to the underfur, and frost had laced itself into the rag that served as bedding, turning each thread brittle. Their mouths made the aimless suckle of infants who dream of warmth. The smallest tried, a tiny, valiant tremor of a sound, and fell quiet again. Jack felt something inside him lean forward, the way a man leans toward a cliff and knows he has already decided to jump. The temperature couldn't have been more than the high teens. In the shadow of the depot wall, it felt lower. A new hour or two of this, and the cold would turn hunger into sleep, and sleep into stillness. He slid his hands beneath the bundle, and the puppies were light but not weightless, their chilled bodies the exact heft of responsibility. Memory, sly and uninvited, moved through him. Another morning, another edge of cold, the way a buddy's fingers go slack when morphine takes the pain, and the rest of him too. He swallowed once, hard. "Hey," he said softly, to the box, to the past, to the three small ambassadors of need. "Not today." A pair of footsteps clipped past on the sidewalk, heels, quick, decisive. The woman attached to them glanced over, 30-something, neat ponytail, a runner's bright windbreaker under a camel coat, earbuds in, her face set to the day. She noticed a man in a chair in a box. She did not notice the way cold pronounces its death sentence. She looked away and sped up. A delivery guy swung his van around, paused at the curb, watched with a professional indifference that had become his weather, then put the van in gear and left the scene to itself. Indifference, Jack had learned, was just another winter. He looked down again. The largest pup's eyes slid open, glazed brown marbles dragging through the world, and fixed for a second on the source of heat that was his hands. There was a gravity to it, the way need and hope make their own physics. Up close, he could see more. The sable male's right ear carried a shallow crease as if another pup's tooth had nicked it in a scramble for teat. The small female's nails were pale and thin, the half-moons of them like opals. The middle one's ribs counted themselves under the skin with a mathematician's clarity. These were working dogs in miniature, all angles of potential underfed and overcold. Their temperaments announced themselves even in their weakness. The big one a guardian in the egg, wary and watchful even as his chin trembled. The small female quietly stubborn, the type to try and try again until the thing relented. The masked pup tender-hearted, the sort who would check his siblings' faces first when trouble came. Jack shrugged out of his field jacket with a single practiced roll of shoulders and arms, a movement that had once been for shedding a plate carrier and now served a gentler war, and wrapped the coat around the three, tucking the sleeves in tight as if the jacket had always been meant to be their first den. Heat moved from him to them in a soft tide. The smallest made a sound then, a near inaudible peep, and the masked pup's chest lifted a hair higher, as if some share of his weight had been lifted by a promise-given shape. The wind pressed at Jack's watch cap and tried the buttons of his shirt, found no entrance, and wandered off to shake a chain on the far fence. He dipped his head and brought the bundle closer to the furnace of his chest. His chair made a faint rubbery squeak as weight shifted. "I've got you," he said, the words almost lost to the world, but not to the three who needed hearing more than anything now. "No one's leaving you to sleep out the dark, not on my watch." He tested their warmth through the jacket, hesitated, then pulled his knit cap off and tucked it loosely over the open box mouth to shield their noses from the wind. His scalp flashed with cold. His ears burned and then went numb the way ears do when they receive a sudden telegram from winter. He smiled at the foolishness of it and did not stop. The depot made another long creak, like a ship turning in its berth. A freight horn keened somewhere out near the river, and the sound ran up the spine of town and dissolved under the mountains. Down the block, a light came alive behind the dusty plate glass of Marty's diner. Marty himself, thick-set and tender-eyed, would be counting eggs and hoping the coffee would taste like mercy today. But here, the world consisted of one man, 3 puppies, a ruined box, and a decision the size of a life. Jack adjusted the bundles so he could see their noses, watch for that fragile bellows to keep lifting and falling. He could almost feel the algorithm of choices spooling out. Clinic hours, distance. The way the curb cuts along South Ridge Street were the wrong shape for speed, but the calculation folded around the constant that mattered. Carry heat, carry hope, carry them. A plastic grocery bag tumbled past, the pale ghost of it catching on a thistle and trembling there like a nervous kite. The sight made Jack laugh. The sound came out of him strange and bright, beating softer than he'd meant. "You hear that?" he asked the bundle. "That's a yes. The city says go." The largest pup twitched an ear, as if in agreement. Jack leaned down, nose almost to the knit cap. and let the scent of them, milk and damp and the iron penny of fear, write itself into him. He had held dying men and newborn promises before. He would hold these now. The sky, so stingy with light all morning, gave up a thin seam of silver along the ridge, and it felt to Jack like a quiet ribbon pinned to the day for bravery. He tightened the jacket around the puppies, slid his hands to his wheels, and looked at the long, cold road out of the depot. Before he pushed off, he bowed his head over the bundle and whispered the vow that would change the rest of the winter and the rooms of his life. No one will abandon you again. Riverside woke with a sting in its teeth. The wind had lost none of its edge and scissored along South Ridge Street, herding scraps of newspaper and last year's leaves into nervous spirals. Jack Turner braced the bundle in his lap. Field jacket wrapped into a blunt cradle, knit cap tented to keep the wind off 3 small noses, and set his palms to the rims. Push, catch, glide, push, catch, glide. His breath came in measured ribbons, each one frosting the rim of the knit cap before thinning to nothing. The puppies were quiet the way candlelight is quiet. He felt their faint, staggered warmth where it pressed through canvas and wool. The big sable male twitching now and then like a dream was rehearsing the act of running. The masked pup's breath shallow and bird-fast. The small female more stubborn about breathing than strong at it, her tiny chest lifting like a hand trying to rise in class. Riverside Veterinary Clinic sat nearly 2 miles away, a glass-fronted building with etched paw prints and a blue-lit sign that said, "Care when you looked fast and cure when you doubled back." He knew the route by habit and by hatred, the cross slope at Grant where snowmelt refroze in a sly slant that grabbed at narrow wheels, the pothole outside the tire shop that had its own personality, the curb cut at the corner by the laundromat that was ADA compliant, the way a riddle is honest. He angled his chair like a skier finding a better line, shoulders burning with the good kind of pain. "All right, little soldiers," he murmured, and the word was humor and benediction both. "We're moving out." He cut through the half-empty lot of a hardware store where a banner still bragged about grand opening after 11 months. A man named Dwayne, not that Jack knew his name, but you can tell a Dwayne when you see one, stepped out to smoke, stocky in a flannel that had been loyal to 3 winters, nose red, eyes kind by default but narrowed by habit. Dwayne saw a man in a chair with a bundle and the posture of purpose. "You good?" he called, not because he meant to help, just because men like Dwayne ask it that way first. "I will be," Jack said, and kept moving. The bundle shivered and he tucked in the jacket higher, angling his body to cheat the wind. The masked pup let out a half sigh, proof that breath still visited him, and Jack's mouth bent into a lopsided smile. He crossed Harper, dodging a delivery van that believed in acceleration more than turn signals. A barista huddled in a doorway, 24 or 25, a silver hoop in one eyebrow, pale hair razored short at the sides and left soft on top, a thrift store peacoat missing one button. Her name tag read Sarah in a hand that tried to be cheerful. Tall and reed thin, she wore the permanent flinch of someone who had learned to expect raised voices around rent day. Kindness sat on her like a cloak she had to share with the cold. She watched Jack, and when the wind pawed at the knit cap, over the puppies she made a small involuntary sound. "Oh," then hugged herself tighter and looked away, ashamed to be moved by a thing she didn't know how to fix. A city bus shouldered past, sighed diesel, and was gone. Jack felt the vibration in the rims and used it, little shock waves jostling him forward half an inch at a time. A hand-lettered sign in a pet store window promised free kitten with approved home in a cheerfulness that didn't understand math. The big pup stirred, nose questing toward the heat of his sternum, and Jack slowed to let the motion settle. "That's it," he said. "Stay with me." The clinic's blue sign finally showed itself like a low star through branches stripped to their careful bones. He could taste the metal of relief in his mouth, pennies and cold. "One more block," he said. He didn't realize he was bargaining with himself, and with whatever saints handled dogs and fools. At the last intersection before the clinic, the light clicked through impatience, and a white SUV grinned with chrome as it rolled a late right turn across the crosswalk. The driver, a woman in a fitness parka with a ponytail as decisive as her jawline, caught sight of the chair and lifted a hand in apology without using any brakes. Jack put 2 palms to the rims, held straight, and let physics decide. It did. The SUV's draft tugged at the knit cap and nearly peeled it off the bundle. Jack snapped his chin down and caught the edge with his teeth, looking for a second like a strange parent in a strange world, and knowing it. He laughed around the wool, a sound so small it felt private. The clinic sat in a shallow bowl of plowed snow. The glass doors were spotless and confident. A poster by the entrance showed a cartoon terrier in a cape. "We're your pet superheroes." The lobby beyond glowed with the polite light of healthcare places, calm, expensive, and convinced of itself. At the curb, a sandwich board said, "Emergency hours observed, payment plans available, please check in at desk." He mounted the ramp, the chair's tires finding grit under old snow, and approached the vestibule where warm air would exist and everything would be simple. The man who stood between outside and inside had the desert in his mustache and the DMV in his eyes. He wore a black security jacket with a patch that read Wilcox, and the jacket sat on a body that had been broad once and was stubborn about not forgetting it. His hair was the gray of gunmetal, trimmed close. His face had the handsome fatigue common to men who had to tell people no for a living. Gene Wilcox was late 50s, a retired warehouse foreman who had reinvented himself as a rulebook with boots. He believed in boundaries because he had seen what happened when pallets slipped and nobody had tied them down. His voice, when he used it, stayed level, the tone of a yard bull who'd rather coax than chase, except when the day ran out of patience. He stepped forward before the doors, could open and heat, could spill. "Morning," he said, the word carrying both welcome and a request to stop. "You'll need to check in and—" He had intended to finish that sentence with the rest of the usual liturgy about appointments and forms and a mask if you've got a cough. But the bundle in Jack's lap was making a complicated case without forms. Wilcox's eyes dipped, took in the wool, the tremor in it, the way Jack's hands framed it like a prayer he'd been memorizing. His mouth lost a little of its no. "What have you got?" "3 shepherd pups," Jack said. 6, maybe 7 weeks, wet, cold. I found them by the old depot. They're barely breathing." He tilted the jacket just enough for Wilcox to see the edge of an ear, the bruised blue tinge at the pup's pale gums. The pup with the dark mask tried a sound that wasn't ready to be a sound and failed it. Something pricked in the guard's face. It might have been compassion or just the discomfort of a new page in his rulebook. "I need to get them under heat, now," Jack said, voice calm because Panic had learned long ago that he hated it. "I'll deal with everything else after." "I'm sorry," Wilcox said, and the words came around a corner he didn't want to turn. "We can't bring animals in without an intake. The techs can't touch them until we have a file. Payment method on record. There's an emergency number posted. You can call from—" He gestured vaguely toward the parking lot, as if phones worked better in cold. "Mr. Wilcox," Jack said, giving him the dignity of the name the jacket offered. "I'm Jack. There isn't time for calls." He angled the bundle closer, and a small wet nose tapped the air like a blind man's cane. The big pup's ear flicked, the crease in it catching the light like a scar. Jack's shoulders were damp from condensation where the knit cap trapped their breath. He felt the edges of his calm the way a man feels the seam in a cup when the liquid is very hot. "I'll pay. I'll sign. I'll owe you my next 6 Christmases, but they have to go in." A woman with a Pomeranian on a rhinestone leash clicked up behind Jack, boots the color of new pennies, perfume insisting on itself. She took in the scene as entertainment first, then as something messier that she didn't want on her shoes. "Is there a problem?" she asked the air, and then said to no one, "I have a 9:30. A college kid in scrubs arrived at the other door with a cardboard tray of coffees, skinny and sleepy, hair askew under a beanie, eyes gentle and bewildered. Jaden, if you had to guess, the sort of person who said sorry to chairs he bumped. He glanced at Wilcox and at the bundle, and then at the floor like he'd been trained to let other people decide the size of his heart. "Sir," Wilcox said, and the word hurt him more than it hurt Jack. "Clinic policy requires—" "Policy," Jack said softly, the way a man names a storm that has blown his roof off twice and still doesn't rate fear. He let the words sit between them. He remembered the rules that had moved men like chess and left them outside wire. He also remembered what it looked like when someone stepped through rule and into right. "My name is Jack Turner," he went on, keeping his voice on the rail where it belonged. "I served 12 years. I have VA retirement. I can show you proof of funds. I can sign your forms on your desk with my elbow if I need to. But these three, and he lowered his face to the jacket, these three don't know policy. They know cold. The woman with the Pomeranian made a small, disgusted noise that might have been for the weather or for the sight of a man making a case. The Pomeranian, who knew suffering when it wore a rhinestone leash, perked its fox face and stared at the jacket with a seriousness that embarrassed its owner. Jaden the tech wobbled inwardly, the way a needle wobbles when a magnet rolls past. He shifted the coffees to one hand and reached into his pocket with the other for the keycard that opened the inner door. Wilcox saw the movement and gave a small headshake, not now, which Jaden obeyed because some instructions arrive riding muscle memory. "I do hear you," Wilcox said, and his voice had softened enough to prove it. "But I have to cover the desk. We've had incidents. Liability." He stood a half step aside to show the posted notice that said, "Emergencies will be triaged. Please have payment method ready. No exceptions." The sign had been printed on a good laser printer and laminated against the elements of human nature. Jack breathed once and let the air out slow. He could feel the totaled minutes behind him and the non-refundable seconds in front. The masked pup's chest hitched like a drunk breath. The small female's claws flexed against the jacket, as if she hoped to climb into a different fate. He set his palms to the rims again, rolled half a foot closer, and when the motion set the big pup's head against his sternum, the faintest whine threaded the air, a mosquito of sound with the weight of a bell. Jack held that sound up between them, like evidence. "Hear that?" he said. "That's paperwork dying." For one bare heartbeat, Wilcox's face cracked at the edges and showed the man under the jacket. Grandfather to three, two of them with allergies. The kind who built bikes for the neighborhood kids at Christmas because it felt like fixing something nobody asked him to fix. He swallowed, then squared back into the man the job needed. "Sir," he said again, apologizing to the word as he used it, "I can't let you in without—" Jack didn't shout. He did not plead. He angled the chair so the heater's breath from the vestibule could sneak around the guard's hip and find the jacket, and he kept his voice low and level, a steady current under ice. "Then stand there and be the reason or the delay," he said, "but pick." The woman with the Pomeranian found her phone and discovered it needed her full attention elsewhere. Jaden balanced the coffee tray and stood very still, as if motion might break something fragile in the room. The clinic's inner door sighed and settled, self-satisfied. The wind worked to the outer door and found it locked by Wilcox's stance. The sign over Jack's shoulder, in bright blue, still promised superheroes. Wilcox set his jaw against the place where heart and job argue. He lifted a hand toward the notice as if it could finish the sentence he didn't have the strength to end. "Payment," he said, and in that single word was every fence he had ever kept, and every night he had asked the ceiling to forgive him for it. Jack slid a hand into his pocket and brought out a folded VA letter and a worn card. "Then read," he said, not unkindly, and held the bundle as if his ribs were the last fire on the mountain. The glass of the clinic doors held the winter like a museum case, and the lobby beyond it glowed with the polite promise of help, but the promise had a hinge, and the hinge had a man named Wilcox standing square over it. Jack balanced the jacket cradle across his thighs and offered the folded VA letter and a worn card without moving the bundle out of the wind. Breath from 3 tiny lives fogged the wool, then vanished. The big sable male twitched again, one ear still crimped at the edge, as if it remembered a nip that taught it caution, while the masked pup breathed in shallow ticking beats, and the little female, narrow-chested and stubborn, made the almost sound of a whisper and tried to keep it. The intersection's cold towed into his sleeves. A teenager in a thrift parka, face lunar with acne, phone held like a weaponized mirror, pivoted for the best angle and smirked a little because smirking cost less than caring. If you had asked, he would have told you his name was Cody Price, 17. Behind in math and ahead in sarcasm, raised by a mother who worked 2 shifts and a succession of boyfriends who never stayed long enough to teach him when to put the phone down. Beside him loitered a man with a pack of menthols rolled into his knit cap, wiry and wind-chapped, the permanent shrug of someone who had carried drywall up too many flights. He chuckled in a way that said nothing here ever surprised him, and everything here disappointed him. And he would probably tell this story later with himself at the center of its judgment. Through the doors, the reception desk sat under a poster of a golden retriever mid-leap. A woman in her early 30s typed, as if the keyboard had personally offended her, Cara Bloom, compact, brunette bob that swung like a metronome when she turned, acrylic nails a sensible neutral rather than a threat, efficient to a fault in the way people get after years of watching cues form faster than solutions. She had a kind streak, but it wore armor. On cue, the inner door hissed, and out stepped a veterinary nurse with a clipboard to protect her from the weather and from the world. Her name badge read Paula Keeley. She was mid-40s, tall and square-shouldered, without being broad, blonde hair skewered into a tidy bun that had defeated the wind, face composed into that careful neutrality health workers wear to keep other people's panic from moving in. A thin white scar ran across her left knuckle. Cat, 2012. Her lower lip carried the slightest dent where a dog's tooth had tapped it once. The cartilage of her nose had the faintest tilt from a softball in another life. Teal scrubs under a gray cardigan that had been washed kind by kind hands. Sneakers new enough to mean long shifts on hard floors. Eyes the cooler shade of blue that reads charts cleanly. She had the practical kindness of someone who refills the coffee before it's empty, and the wariness of someone who has chased too many unpaid invoices and watched too many rescues become abandonments. Paula stepped into the vestibule, felt the wind make a home in the gap between doors, took one look at Jack's lap and one at Wilcox's squared jaw, and selected a stance that let her see both without encouraging either. "Sir," she said, and the word was professional, not cruel. "This is a clinic, not a shelter for strays." The sentence came out practiced, the way you say, close enough at a register when the drawer is short. But somewhere under it sat another sentence she would not say. "I can't fix everything that shows up at this door, and it keeps showing up." Jack didn't flinch. He held the papers higher with his left hand and angled the bundle so a sliver of wet black nose could find a bit of vestibule warmth. The little female's claws flexed against the wool, as if the fabric might be a mountain. "I don't need it to be a shelter," he said. "I need a thermometer, warmed fluids, a heat source, and someone who knows what to do with lives this small when the night has had its say. I'll pay whatever you ask. I can sign whatever you need, but they can't stand outside the policy and survive it." Paula's eyes flicked to the knit cap, saw the fine frost rimming it, the way it clung and then melted again, saw the damp at the edges of his jacket where breath had tried to build a house and failed. She did not move. Training, that stern cousin of compassion, held her wrist still. "Intake first," she said, not unkindly, just as one cites gravity. "We need a client profile. Found animals have a process. Contact with the city shelter. A hold in case an owner appears. There are vaccination protocols, and we're short-staffed this morning. We can put you on a list." The word list dropped into the cold and shattered into laughter from the man with the menthols. "Get in line with the rest of us, huh?" he said to no one. Cody's phone swiveled, hungry for the moment. The video needed conflict to go viral. Cara inside had stopped typing, her mouth thinned, because thin is what mouths do when they are about to say no and wish they could say yes. The wind pressed at the hinge again, and in the pressure the masked pup's breath stuttered. Jack set his jaw. He had been told to wait for medevac once while a friend's heartbeat tapped out the final code. He had stood at a wire while a schedule insisted it had a wisdom beyond the ache on the other side of it. He knew the exact weight of this kind of hour. Somewhere in the back rooms a microwave dinged, and the smell of warmed chicken and rice kibble drifted through like comfort in a language nobody out here could understand. "Ms. Keeley," he said, using the badge to cross the gulf respectfully, "I am not asking you to be lawless. I am asking you to be fast. Take them in. I'll give you the paperwork while you work. I'll call the shelter myself and be the contact. I'll keep them if nobody claims them for the next 100 years. Just," he swallowed, and his voice did not break because practice had taught it to hold, "don't let the wind be the last thing they feel." Paula's gaze moved to Wilcox, the trained triangle of decision, patient, procedure, policy. Wilcox didn't shift his boots. He had done this long enough to know the difference between a scene and a decision. He also had done it long enough to know that in winter, decisions are scenes. "I can't override desk protocol," he said, almost to himself, one palm lifting toward the laminated sign. Cody cleared his throat and gave the moment an audience. "Yo, this is crazy," he stage whispered to his phone. "Guy in a wheelchair trying to save puppies, and they're like, nah." He giggled and then couldn't find where to put the giggle, so it hung above them like a balloon nobody wanted. From the parking lot came the clatter of an old bicycle, handlebars taped with blue painter's tape, a milk crate zip-tied on the back. The rider coasted up and put one sneaker down, then the other. She was in her late 20s, Latina, sharp-boned and compact, hair in a practical braid, work jacket spattered with something that might have been paint, or might have been last week's storm. Her name was Rosa Alvarez. She delivered flyers for 3 small businesses and medicines for 1 pharmacy when they had too many to run. She had the face of someone who had learned to keep her head low around trouble and to lift it like a sword around children. She took in the tableau with a traveler's economy and said softly to Jack, "You want my scarf? It's wool." The question was a hand extended in a way that didn't demand a story. Jack eased the knit cap back just enough to test the air again. The big pup's nose quested and found his wrist, pressed. "Keep it," he said. "Save it for the next person. This is going to be fast, or it's going to be nothing." The menthol man snorted at the phrase as if he had invented it and the world had failed to license it from him. Paula's clipboard lowered half an inch. "How long?" she asked, and the question walked a narrow bridge between skepticism and surrender. "Minutes matter," Jack said. "If you have a heat pad and warmed, lactated ringers, if you can check glucose." The medical words landed in her like a key in a well-used lock. She didn't like that he knew them. She liked that he knew them. People who knew words sometimes used them to bully. People who knew words sometimes saved you steps. "We have to tag them," she said, shoring up the reason. "We can start in treatment 3, but we need a method of payment on file before—" "On file," Jack said, lifting the card. The hand holding it was steady now, as if the part of him that shook had decided trembling wasted heat. "Put everything on this until you can't. Then call me back to tell me how to owe you more." Kara inside had risen without meaning to. Eyes on Paula, on Wilcox, on the drift of responsibility. She had a little brother who had once rescued a rabbit and spent a summer mowing lawns to pay a vet to fix what a snare had done. She remembered the smell of cut grass and anxiety and the long, slow bloom of relief when a nose twitched again. She turned the card reader toward the vestibule and lifted a brow that meant, "I can do my part if you do yours." Paula exhaled. The sound fogged and thinned. "We can't accept strays without notifying the shelter," she said, but the sentence had lost half its armor. "You can notify them from the treatment room," Jack said. "I'll be the voice on the other end. Put my name as finder and provisional foster if it helps." Cody's phone caught the side of Jack's face, and the blue bite of the sign, and Paula's profile, and posted it without asking the morality of the thing. Rosa took her scarf off anyway, and held it ready like a flag of truce. For just a beat, the winter held its breath, as if the town were waiting to see if it had earned a thaw. Inside the clinic, a shadow moved across the far hall window, a measured silhouette that seemed to carry its own weather. He was tall and slimmed by age rather than diet, a man in his late 60s whose hair had retreated to a dignified silver horseshoe, whose beard was trimmed down to the thought of itself, whose eyes were the gray of water where rivers decide to get serious. He wore a white coat that had given up pretending it didn't remember farm calls and late nights and the gentle astonishments of small lives refusing to quit. The lines bracketing his mouth suggested he smiled without performance and frowned without fury. His haunts, what you saw of them, were those square, competent tools old veterinarians get from a lifetime of persuasion and stitches. This was Dr. Howard Ellison, founding partner of Riverside Veterinary, son of a feed store owner who had taught to carry calves and promises in the same arms, a man whose temper ran cool until injustice found the pilot light. He paused at the edge of the lobby, saw the cluster of bodies at his door, saw Wilcox's stance, Paula's clipboard, the wool-wrapped bundle, the man in the chair holding the heat in like a furnace built of ribs, the way the wind kept an argument going with a sign that promised superheroes. He did not speak. He watched, and the watching drew a fine, almost invisible crease between his brows, like a question written with a fountain pen. Jack Turner balanced the jacket cradle on his knees as if it were both a standard and a secret, and his voice, quiet but carrying, cut through the vestibule like a plumb line dropped in water. "If no one here will own this," he said, "then let me. I've already given up my legs. I'm not giving up 3 more heartbeats." He set his wallet and a worn VA card on the low counter by the inner door, the card's raised numbers shiny from years of being used as proof he still counted, and slid the folded letter beside it. I have monthly VA disability. I can pay. Start the care and bill me until the ink quits. Please. He did not lift the bundle to display suffering like a poster. He only turned it enough that a line of breath could find the warm seam between doors. The big sable male tightened a tiny frown of will and pushed his nose deeper into the wool. The masked pup's chest tripped, then tried again. The small female gave a stubborn, papery squeak that sounded like a match dragged over damp flint. The wind shouldered at the glass, and the laminated sign smiled its blue promise in return. Gene Wilcox's mouth worked once as if chewing a word he didn't want to say. Sir, he began, but the syllable had to travel through policy and pride, and the old scar of a layoff that had taught him to hold tight to rules, because rules had held him when nothing else did. He gestured with one open hand, wide and apologetic, toward the reception where Kara stood frozen mid-keystroke. Paula Keeley stood at her careful angle, the professional pivot between compassion and compliance, clipboard held against her chest like a thin shield. The fluorescent light iced her scrubs. The cardigan looked like the last soft thing in the room she was allowed to wear. She had seen desperate people with animals, and desperate animals with people, and she had learned to tell a which would put her clinic in the kind of story that kept managers awake at night. Jack's face, narrowly cut, winter-browned, and clean-shaven, did not beg. It simply refused to look away. Around them, the small chorus of Riverside assembled, as if the town had been handed a script and asked to improvise. Cody Price's phone bobbed, hungry for a view count that might finally make somebody look back at him with the expression he had always tried to borrow from other people's screens. The man with the menthols gave a practiced laugh that covered the place in him that used to wince at the sight of small, helpless things. Rosa Alvarez kept her scarf ready, a flag of wool that could be peace or triage. Behind glass, Kara's jaw unclenched a notch. She had the barista Sarah's shape in her mind, tall, thin, flinchy, and for a second she thought of how many Sarahs and Codys there were in town, of how many rules had been written, because stories like theirs broke hearts and budgets. The clinic's hallway framed a figure and then delivered it. Dr. Howard Ellison stepped into the lobby, with the contained gait of someone who had spent a lifetime taking the long way around panic. Late 60s, tall without needing you to notice, his white coat carried the faint geometry of years, stitching reinforced, pockets sagged by instruments, cuffs laundered into a memory of starch. His hair had retreated from his crown with the dignity of an old general leaving a battlefield to a new generation. A close-trimmed beard gave his mouth something to anchor to when it needed to be kind or firm. His eyes were slate water, calm until upstream weather decided otherwise, and his hands were square, nicked, and oddly elegant, the hands of a man who had been trusted to take hurt things and make them less so. He took in the tableau with one sweep and filed its parts into the quiet drawers of his mind. The guard, good man, not cruel, just built of caution. The nurse, good nurse, not cold, just exhausted by the arithmetic of too many needs. The man in the wheelchair holding heat like an oath. The jackets and phones and expectant air. "What have we got?" he asked, voice low enough to bring heads down rather than up. Paula turned her clipboard just enough to let the x-rays of protocol show through the paper. "Found litter of 3, she said, professional even in mercy. German Shepherd pups, 6 to 7 weeks by dentition. Hypothermic, likely hypoglycemic, wet to the undercoat. No intake yet. Mr. Wilcox is holding the door until we—" She didn't finish the sentence because she could hear her own caution cracking like a pane in the cold. Jack angled the bundle a fraction. "They were in a box by the old depot," he said. "Cold as a drawer. I've got money and time. I don't have minutes." He nodded at his wallet and the letter like a man offering references at the river Styx. Dr. Howard's gaze moved to the knit cap and back to Jack's face, paused at the scar that went jaw to ear, registered the way the man's hands shaped themselves around the small weight of need without theatrics. He knelt, because kneeling puts you nearer to truth. He hovered a hand an inch above the bundle to feel the heat, what there was of it, sensed the faint trembling that meant muscle still argued with cold. The masked pup's breath ticked his knuckles like seconds hammered thin. "All right," Howard said, and the word had the roundness of a decision finished forming. He stood. "Jaden," he called, not looking up because the clinic had taught him where his people stood even when they were trying to be invisible. Treatment 3, heat pad on low, warming box, 2 18-inch hot water bottles in towels, and a bear hugger if anesthesia isn't using it. Prep warmed LRS, check dextrose. Paula, glucose curves and rectal temps on all 3. If the lowest is below 60, we'll microbolus with dextrose 12.5% and reassess. Kara, start a provisional file under Foundlings, Depot 3, and put Mr. Turner as primary contact. We'll notify the C. Shelter from the treatment room as required. Jean, hold the door for me. Wilcox blinked. His body moved before his brain filed the consent form. He stepped aside and put his hand to the bar with a small flourish that said he'd like to be remembered for this part, not the last. The outer cold lifted a few degrees where Howard stood. It was partly the heater's breath and partly how certain people make rooms do what they were built to do. Doctor, Paula said, a caution packed gently into the title, we haven't run the card. And we will, Howard said, already sliding his arms under the bundle with a practiced tenderness that did not jostle air. If the card fails, we will still be us. He lifted the jacket cradle like a chalice. The big pup's ear brushed his wrist, and a memory shifted behind his eyes of a long-ago farm kitchen where a boy had warmed piglets in the oven's open door, while a blizzard measured the windows in fists. I'm here, he told the 3 softly, and they believed him because mammals know the sound of promises kept. Jack felt a pressure ease along his ribs, as if a strap he hadn't known he was wearing had been cut. He gathered his wallet and letter without taking his eyes off the pups. I'll come with, he said to no one and to the whole room. You will, Howard said, turning. You're the heat they know. He stepped into the vestibule. The woman with the Pomeranian found her reflection in the glass and arranged her face into an expression that would look kind if it were caught on Cody's feed. Cody lowered his phone, surprised by the taste of his own relief. Rosa, still holding her scarf like an offering, smiled from the eyes and put it back on, tugging the knot as if fastening hope to her throat. Kara clicked the provisional file into existence, typing with a speed that made the keys sound like small hooves on a wooden bridge. She didn't look up, because sometimes the useful thing is to use your hands for the thing at hand. Jaden ghosted past with the coffee carrier abandoned on an end table, his beanie pushed back, eyes awake now, the small sprint in his steps, the sprint of a greyhound who has finally been allowed to run. I'll grab the warming box, he said to the air, which counts as saying it to everyone in a clinic. Paula pivoted, already stripping a glove from her pocket with her teeth, knuckles efficient, the scar on her left one catching light like a tiny white guideline. We'll need tags, she said, but the sentence agreed rather than objected. We'll call them A, B, and C until names find them, Howard said, and then he looked at Jack. Unless you've got names ready. Jack's mouth curved. Not until they've earned them, he said. They already have, Rosa murmured, too soft for anyone to cash as currency, but the room seemed to spend it anyway. Wilcox's hand tightened and opened on the door bar, his eyes wet in the corners, where drafts gather. Doctor, he tried one last time, low, not as an obstacle, but as a man who liked to make sure everyone saw every step. Liability. Jean, Howard said without turning. I've been liable since 1983. Let's be liable faster. The inner doors complied with a civilized sigh. The warmth gathered itself, and for an instant the vestibule felt like the throat of a furnace. Howard moved through, the bundle a small planet with its own weather cradled against him. Jack rolled in steady at his elbow, wheels whispering thank you to the tile. Paula slipped behind with the clipboard, now open, but pointed toward doing rather than denying. Jaden's voice carried down the hall. Treatment 3 is ready, and Kara's printer clicked out a label like a benediction you could stick to a chart. The lobby emptied of certainty, then refilled with it, redirected. As the door settled behind them, Wilcox found himself standing guard over nothing and everything, and he breathed out a laugh that sounded like surrender learning to like itself. Outside, the wind made one last argument and lost it against glass. Inside, the corridor widened into light, and the clinic remembered the promise on its poster. Treatment 3 was a bright square of mercy, too clean and too white to belong to winter. Warm air moved with a soft storm steadiness under the whisper of a forced air warming unit, and the steel table had already been draped with thick towels that trapped heat like a promise. Dr. Howard Ellison set the jacket cradle down with the same deliberate care he would have used for a crystal bowl, that remembered who gave it to the family, and the room folded itself around the task. Paula Keeley, mid-40s, tall and square-shouldered, a tidy bun pinned to a life that had learned to take steps in the order that saved the most. Jaden in sleep-creased scrubs, boy-thin and gentle-eyed, moving like a good thought. And from the back door came the soft thunder of Margot Singh, a senior veterinary technician in her late 50s, with a steel-gray bob and half-moon glasses that she peered over when she wanted the world to behave. 5'4" and uncompromising, wrists corded from a career of lifting what other people had dropped. A tender impatience that sounded like you should know better, but meant I care enough to argue. Margot wore clogs the color of black coffee, and an old wedding band that had outlasted a divorce because some symbols felt like habits, and some habits felt like anchors. She set a plastic tub of gear on the counter, rectal thermometers, a glucose meter, 25-gauge needles, alcohol, lube, a coil of IV line, and said, "All right, babies, let's turn you back into heat." Paula was already gloving, the scar across her knuckle chalk white under the fluorescent lights, voice trimmed to the clean edges of the work. We'll call them A, B, C for now. A is the big sable male, B is the dark masked boy, C is the small female, temps first. Howard nodded, and Jaden slipped the knit cap away like a stagehand taking responsibility for darkness. He lifted Pup A to his chest, hand under the ribs, and held him in a way that let the pup's ear feel the thrum of a living drum. Pup A's earfold twitched, and his head bumped instinctively toward the furnace of a sternum. "Rectal on A," Paula said. The thermometer slid, beeped, and she frowned. 93.4. Hypothermic? B? Jaden steadied the masked pup, felt the bird-fast rise and fall that stuttered more than it breathed. 91.8, Paula read, and a silence in the room admitted what a number like that meant. C? Margot, hands old enough to be gentle with newness, murmured to the little female, while the digital readout counted its way to worry. 92.3. Howard's voice rolled in low and level. Heat support first, then sugar. Margot, bear hugger on low, drape them but leave the noses. Jaden, set up the warmed lactated ringers and draw up dextrose. We'll start with oral sugar if we can swallow, IV or intraosseous if we can't, and small, no bolus floods today. Paula, check glucose. If below 60, we'll start at 12.5%. Dextrose microdose and reassess. The bear hugger, its hose a pale, flexible trunk, breathed warm air under the blanket they made of towels. Heat diffused into the pups like dawn arriving in nervous increments. Paula pricked a tiny ear vein on A. A bead of blood rose, the color of stubbornness, and the meter blinked 52. She shot a glance at Howard. Low. Oral, he said. Side of the gum. Small, frequent. Margot smeared a fingerful of dextrose gel along the slick pink of the gum. Pup. A smacked reflexively, a rudiment of appetite surviving under the machinery of cold, and a small swallow ran under Margot's fingertip. Good lad, she murmured. B? Paula got nothing from B's ear for a second, then coaxed a tremulous bead. The meter spat 38, and she exhaled through her nose. He's crashing. Jaden handed over a tiny oxygen mask, a soft silicone bell with a clear dome that made a small space where breath could decide to return, held it loosely over the mask muzzle, and watched the dome cloud and clear in a rhythm that had too much quiet in it. A wine a minute ago, he offered, because details become tools when time is short. C? 56, Mateyi, Paula said, and that number lived in the neighborhood where hope can talk to experience. Oral for C, IV for B, Howard said. Jaden, hang 12.5% dextrose. We'll go slow. Paula, 25-gauge catheter if you can. If not, IO in the tibia with lidocaine, but I think the ear vein might give us one today if we don't scare it. Outside the room, the hallway gathered a different kind of warmth, the kind that comes from waiting and from the friction of worry. Jack Turner held the sides of his chair, fingers white at the tips, and listened to the sounds he knew, the murmur of command, the brief rap of trays, the respectful hurry that means you've entered a room where every second is money you spend gladly. Kara stepped out from behind her desk long enough to place a paper cup of water on the ledge near him. The gesture was small and human, like tucking a blanket up under the chin of a sleeping child, so they don't wake all the way. I'll run your card when they tell me to, she said quietly, and her voice contained the exact amount of defiance to make a rule feel like a tool rather than a god. Jack nodded without looking up. His eyes held treatment 3 like a steady aim. Down the hall, a metal cart churred as its wheel found a bad bearing. Tomas Rivera pushed it, tall and soft-spoken, late 30s, anesthesia tech with the posture of a man who has learned to be his own quiet. Brown skin warmed by a southwestern childhood, close-cropped hair, a thin scar at his eyebrow that had nothing to do with medicine, and everything to do with a life lived in neighborhoods where ambulance sirens arrived like weather. He parked the cart outside treatment 3, checked the bear hugger's spare hose, set an extra oxygen tank on the ready, and gave Jack a gissu. Brief nod that meant I know the look of someone who gave their body to other people's safety. I'm sorry you know it too. In the room, the battle narrowed. Paula slid a catheter into B's cephalic vein, hands steady under the light. The vein tried to roll away like shy water, and Margot braced gently, thumb a small dam. Got it, Paula said, voice unsmiling but relieved, and taped the butterfly down with the infinite care nurses save for moments like this. Jaden bled a line of warmed dextrose, checked the drip with a wrist's flick, and adjusted the bear hugger's edge so it cupped the 3 without smothering their noses. Howard kept his hands on things, and his mind on everything, his voice threading through like a metronome that refused to speed no matter the conductor's heart. A, gum again. C, gum and heat. B, dextrose, slow, good. Watch for Brady, watch for chest. B's chest decided it had had enough. The breath hitch inverted into a pause too long to call a pause. Jaden saw it first. He had the kind of eyes that notice the way a leaf's shadow changes when the wind means mischief. Doctor, he said, and in that one syllable the room pivoted. Paula was already there, forefinger and thumb encircling B's tiny chest, thumbs over heart, compressions at a rate learned in classes and corrected by experience. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Gentle, precise, refusing to be rough even now. Margot tilted the head, extended the neck, cleared the mouth with a pinky that had done this too many times to call it luck, and sealed her mouth lightly over the tiny muzzle through a micro-mask. 5 gentle breaths. Watch the chest rise. Don't overinflate. Don't drown. Howard's voice stayed ironed flat. Keep compressions. Jaden, bump the dextrose a hair. Paula, count for us. Good. 8, 9, 10. Breath. 1, 2, 3. Breath. For a moment, the room made a sound like prayer said with hands. B's tongue, a small gray petal, pinked a shade. His chest fought the idea of rising and then adopted it again, grudging, as if embarrassed to have needed help in front of the others. He's back, Paula said, not triumphant but grateful, and eased the compressions down until a beat met her fingers that was his own and not borrowed. Outside, Jack lowered his forehead to his knuckles and let out a breath that had stayed too long under his ribs. He had held a man's head like that once while the helicopter learned how to become a dot rising out of heat. Had counted compressions in dust while flies wrote their names in the sunlight. Had watched a mouth say teller and then forget its word. He tasted iron a long time after that day. Now the iron tasted like a room where algebra was turned into breath. Minutes went on their long, thin legs. Heat did its work without being asked for applause. Numbers climbed like careful hikers. 94.1, 95, 90 sul, and glucose numbers slid into ranges that had names other than please. Pup. A licked Margot's knuckle once and then again, the second time with a shy determination that made the senior tech laugh under her breath. Pupsy, the small female with the white coin on her chest, decided that stubbornness would be her religion and tried to sit up before the world had earned it. Paula's hand touched her with the exact pressure that says, "Lie down, sweetheart, there's time." B, the masked boy, slept a sleep heavy like thaw, breath coming now in little trains that arrived on schedule. Howard's cadence changed from command to revision. Temps? A 98.3, Paula said. B 97.9, Jaden read. C 98.1, Margot added. Glucose holding, A 82, B 71, C 75. Good, Howard said. Keep the bear hugger low, no roasting. Fluid slow and small. Let them do the rest. He stepped back then, the way a craftsman steps back from a join to see if the wood has agreed to marriage. He took his hands off the table and found that they trembled a little, which is its own kind of liturgy. He pulled a glove, let it snap into the bio bin, smoothed his beard as if smoothing the moment, and looked toward the door. In the hall, the air felt like the moment a bell stops ringing, but leaves the shape of its sound behind. Dr. Howard came out into that silence and leaned his shoulder against the frame, white coat breathing a little like it had done work with him. He looked at Jack, a man who had learned to sit like a tree in wind, and the corners of his mouth found a quarter-inch of smile. "They're past the immediate danger," he said, not loud, not soft, exactly as much as the hallway could hold. "But they need to stay a few days. Heat, glucose, observation." The words landed in Jack like warm water poured into a bowl that had cracked and been mended. He nodded, once, twice, then put his face in his hands, because sometimes there is nothing else to do with gratitude but let it leak. His shoulders shook, not wildly, just as if an old house had settled and been forgiven for it. Kara lifted a tissue box from the desk and left it on the ledge without making the moment a performance. Tomas smiled very slightly in the way of men who have seen fights end, and know victory needs quiet more than cheering. In Treatment 3, Margot argued softly with Pup C about the wisdom of naps and Lost. Paula wrote numbers on a chart with a tidy hand that had finally permitted itself to unclench, and Jaden stood there looking at 3 small bodies under a blanket of warm air, and felt his chest widen in the odd, private way that makes a person decide to keep doing a job that will break him open again tomorrow. The warm unit hummed, the oxygen sighed, the instruments gleamed in the manner of tools that had been reminded what they were born to do, and Winter pressed its face to the window and saw that for now it had been kept on the true, other side of the glass. By morning the snow had given up on falling and settled for glittering where the sun could find it, but Riverside still breathed like a town with a cough. In Treatment 3, the machines had quieted to the soft, bossy hum of warmth doing work, and 3 small chests rose with the clock's patience under a tent of towels. Dr. Howard moved like a man editing his relief into usefulness. Paula wrote a neat column of numbers that behaved. Jaden hovered with the nervous devotion of a new beekeeper. "They'll stay a few days," Howard said, the way a man says grace, and Jack, eyes salted from a night that had wrung him, nodded and let the chair roll back into the hallway's quieter light. The Animal Rescue Center phoned at 9, and the woman on the line had a voice like a knuckle rapping on wood, firm but not unfriendly. "We saw the intake," she said. "We're dispatching a volunteer to trace the origin. We'll coordinate with your clinic." The volunteer who arrived at the clinic an hour later wore the day like armor. Marisol Vega was early 40s and built compact, black hair cropped to a practical bob with a streak of premature silver that looked like experience had signed its name there. Olive skin turned windrose by winters spent knocking on doors. Brown eyes that took the measure of a room in one glance and then softened when a living thing occupied it. Jeans, boots, quilted jacket, the color of moss, a messenger bag stitched with patches from rescues she had helped organize, bottle babies, feral cat clinics, a hurricane's worth of relocations. Before this, she had been a paralegal at a firm that billed by the quarter hour and measured mercy by retainer. A wrongful eviction she couldn't stop had scalded her into a change of life, and now she showed up where stories began with sorry. She shook Dr. Howard's hand, then Jack's, and offered the kind of smile that held back nothing but time. "Marisol," she said, "Animal Rescue Center. I brought consent forms and questions, and coffee." She handed a paper cup to Jack, black, hot, honest, and opened a notebook fat with ink. "Start me at the box." Jack talked her through the depot, the cardboard that had held the chill like a secret, the duct-tape sloppy H, the smell of warm milk turned into a ghost by cold. Marisol listened the way good detectives listen, eyes steady, pen quiet, head tilted like a dog hunting a frequency. "We'll canvass the route," she said. "There's a hardware store with a camera that faces the alley. A bus depot usually has at least one camera that still works, even when the schedules don't. And there's a coffee cart on Harper." She flicked a glance to Kara. "You know the barista?" Kara nodded. Sarah, tall, silver hoop, hair short on the sides, shy smile. "I know her," Marisol said. "She volunteers at our kitten bottle feed sometimes, when rent isn't hunting her." She pivoted to Jack. "If you've got the fuel come with." People tell better truths when they see who's asking. They pushed out into the bright cold. The hardware store's camera gave them a shape at 6:03 a.m. Slim, denim jacket flapping, a cardboard box hugged like a tired child. Cap pulled low, cheap sneakers, bare hands. The figure paused by the depot wall, crouched, rested the box, then looked both ways with the guilty choreography of someone who wasn't stealing and felt like she was. The timestamp said 06:05 when she ran. The coffee cart traded them an angle and a name. Sarah, tall, reed thin, the silver hoop catching morning like a coin in a beggar's bowl, had been setting out lids when she saw a girl cross Harper with a box bigger than it made sense for her to carry. Brown hair, messy pony, Sarah said, hugging herself, voice careful in the way of someone who had learned not to attract the weather. Jacket torn at the shoulder, she moved like she was cold in her bones. She headed toward the West Side tracks. Marisol thanked her by buying a coffee she didn't have time to drink and by asking if Sarah was still coming to Kitten Feed Wednesday. Sarah smiled like a bruise. If I make it. The West Side station never really woke up. It just pretended for the morning commute and then flopped back down into benches that remembered palms and tears. The station attendant on duty was a man in his 50s with a sunburst of laugh lines he didn't use today. Alan Cho, short, vigorous, black hair gone salt at the temples, a tendency to worry aloud that made him sound like he jingled. He had a yellow safety vest and a pencil behind his ear and a heart that had worn thin in places. I know the girl, he said when Marisol asked. She's been sleeping in here some nights until the patrol comes around. Keeps to herself, not strung out, just... He rotated his hand, searching for the word. Thin, like life took too much. Name? She didn't offer. Bought a hot chocolate once, exact change in nickels, said, thanks like it hurt. Marisol took it in and thanked him back. She moved the search to the far bench where the heat duct blew lukewarm air and where the windows made gray oblongs of light. A young transit officer came in with the weather. Officer Dan Pritchard, mid-30s, 6 feet of polite caution, sandy hair shaved down to a law-abiding shadow, a fleece over his uniform because the budget did not understand January. He had the soft-spoken manner of a man who had learned that volume can be a weapon and preferred not to draw it. We're not your bad guys, he said, gentle when he heard the story. If she's here, I'll walk away when you find her. He nodded toward the far platform. Try track 2, less wind. Marisol and Jack rolled out to track 2. The wind played harmonica between the rails and pulled at posters of towns you could leave for cheap if you didn't count the cost. A pair of pigeons huddled like old couples. A girl dozed in an S of exhaustion on the bench beneath the arrivals board, head bent, denim jacket for a pillow, a plastic sack slouched near her sneakered feet, bread rolls and a bottle of water. She was 19 if the world had been gentle, and perhaps older if it hadn't. Brown hair dull with too many days outdoors, tangled into a ponytail with a red elastic, eyes ringed bruised blue by sleepless nights. The left shoulder of the denim jacket had a tear thumb length, the cotton batting peeking out like a wound that wouldn't close. Her jeans were thrift store thin at the knees. Her hands were chapped and knitted with the small, honest cuts of someone who had lifted and scrubbed and adjusted cages. One knuckle showed a crescent scar like a dog tooth had signed it. When she breathed, the breath came shallow and frugal, as if even oxygen were a thing to ration. Marisol sat on the end of the bench, hands visible, voice pitched to kindness. Hi there, she said. I'm Marisol with Animal Rescue. This is Jack. We're not police. We're trying to thank someone who did a hard thing. The girl startled, every muscle doing the math of run versus freeze. And then her gaze found Jack, man in a chair, face tired but open. A jacket she recognized because need recognizes everything it has met. And something in her eased by a fraction. Are they... she began, and the word snagged on a thorn in her throat. Alive, Jack said. They're warm. They ate a little. The clinic says they'll stay a few days. The girl closed her eyes, and tears slipped out from under the lids, like prisoners in a movie who can't help but be heroic even while they escape. I left them where people are, she whispered. I left them where someone would hear. Marisol kept her eyes on the girl's hands. What's your name? A pause, the kind you take when you are deciding whether to be yourself. Rachel, she said finally, almost a question. Rachel Goss. She sat up by inches, ponytail slipping, and rubbed her palms down her jeans as if ashamed of where they had been. I didn't dump them like trash. I know, Marisol said. Tell me what happened. Rachel's story came out in cautious pieces that fit together like a cracked plate reassembled. Her mother had died when she was 16, breast cancer that got there on a bus of bills. Her stepfather had disappeared 3 weeks into hospice because some men think you can outwalk grief if you don't take it with you. Rachel left school to keep a roof on the little one-bedroom they could no longer afford. The roof left anyway. She drifted, a couch here, a cot there, a church basement, a boyfriend with hands that apologized after, then didn't. A job at High Plains Shepherds, a kennel out past the grain silos, had felt like salvation. She had a knack. She could read a dog before the dog remembered itself. She knew when a bitch was nesting and when she was asking for help. She learned heat lamps and bottle angles and the low hum you make when you want small things to believe the world isn't loud. When the owner sold the property last fall to a developer who had never seen a whelping box up close, the kennel closed with a brass padlock and a handshake that bounced. Rachel stayed long enough to help the last litters wean off. She slept 2 nights in the tack room, under a horse blanket, no horses used anymore. The breeder's brother found her in the morning and told her to go. A week ago, a man with a backyard breeding operation he did not have the money or mercy to maintain came to the station trying to sell pups cheap from the back seat of a sedan. Rachel saw the runts shivering in the shadow of a busted heater and said she could take them for a night or two, buy them time, find a warm somewhere. She put them under her jacket and walked out before the man could decide whether to hit her or to let the problem go. She tried. She fed them with a syringe water sweetened with honey when she could steal packets from the diner, kept them in her coat, slept sitting up so they wouldn't roll into cold, coaxed them with whisper and body heat. But the night before last winter came through the station with its hands out, and she understood she was not a furnace, just a girl. She found the box behind the bodega and carried it to the depot because that's where people pass, where stories have to share air. I stayed until a truck went by, she said, voice thinned by shame and hunger. I thought it would wake somebody. I wanted to knock on the clinic door, but the guard there, She stopped herself, as if blaming would ruin the little dignity she had left. She looked at the bread bag by her feet. I know people call it dumping. I was trying to put them in a place where somebody could hear. Jack listened with his chin down, the way you listen when you are keeping the other person from drowning in their own story. He could see the biography and the details, the crescent tooth scar, the burn puckered small on her wrist where a heat lamp had kissed her once, the windbite on her cheeks. He could also see the subterranean map of decisions made without good choices to pick from. You stayed with them until you couldn't do more, he said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't absolution. It was a description, and it did not flinch. Rachel nodded once, and her mouth folded a little, not quite a wince, not quite a smile. I'm not a monster, she said, a plea taught to her by people who didn't look long enough. No, Jack said, and his voice carried the weight of a verdict returned by a jury that had actually listened. You're cold. You're tired. You were kind past your resources. He reached into the lap blanket and came up with the knit cap he had found at the back of the chair. A spare this time, not the one that had served as a roof for the pups. And he offered it. Across the small distance between strangers, Rachel took it like a person accepts a passport. Thank you, she breathed. The station's old heat duct coughed and tried better. Marisol, who had seen 100 versions of this day and never once liked them less, wrote Rachel's name in her notebook, as if names mattered. They do, and said, I'm going to get you somewhere warm to talk to someone who will not be cruel. I'll tell you where the dogs are and how they're doing. You can decide what you want to do next without the wind making the decision for you. Rachel nodded quickly, the kind of nod you use when the rope has finally been thrown and you're afraid it will be pulled back. Her eyes flicked to Jack, then down, an apology and a thank you sharing the same breath. Jack did not offer advice. He did not reach for righteousness. He only met her eyes and let the ordinary mercy stand. And in that simple looking, no judgment, just understanding, he felt the old ache in him shift into something that looked a lot like forgiveness for parts of the world he couldn't fix, but would not stop trying to. The Animal Rescue Center of Riverside looked like every building that tried to hold grief and hope under one roof. Bleached cinder block, softened by a mural of paw prints and sunflowers. the smell of disinfectant braided with the sweeter, humbler smell of kibble and wet fur. Noon light fell hard and blue through the high windows, slicing the conference room table into islands of shadow. On the wall, a bulletin board showed a grid of happily home photos. Dogs and cats in new collars, children with gap-toothed grins, older couples whose faces had finally unclenched. Jack Turner rolled in beside Marisol Vega, his chair humming softly over the juncture where old tile met newer linoleum. He wore his cleanest flannel and the field jacket that had become a covenant, hair combed, jaw smooth, the battle dress of a man who understood that respect is a language with verbs. Marisol tucked a pen behind one ear and set a folder on the table with the careful force of a person who builds houses out of paper and truth. At the far end sat Lila Moreno, the center's director, early 50s, compact and unruffled, the kind of Latina whose presence untangled knots. Her black hair, streaked with ash gray like the memory of storm clouds, was pulled into a low knot. A fine scar across one eyebrow gave her face a slight tilt toward concern. The lines beside her mouth said she smiled often. The fine cannons of stress by her temples said she didn't always have time to. Lila's strength was pragmatic tenderness, no flourishes, no speeches, but a spreadsheet's fidelity to reality and a grandmother's refusal to give up on you. To Lila's right perched Gordon Pike, the city liaison to animal services, a narrow man in his 60s who wore his necktie in a way that suggested it might get ideas if he didn't keep it on a short leash. His hair was thinning and combed with the exactness of a habit that hoped to cover something. His eyes were the dun of bank statements and November fields. He had charm when he remembered it, but budget anxiety had filed it down. "We can't add more exceptions," he'd said the last time someone brought a box of problems. Today he folded his hands as if they might attempt generosity if he let them. On Lila's left sat Naomi Brooks, foster coordinator, early 30s, brown skin the color of walnut, twist-out curls tucked into a bandana patterned with tiny bones. A small rose tattoo bloomed at the inside of one wrist, and a forearm carried the barest ghost of a scar. Feral cat, week 6 of this job. She had a manner like a favorite aunt who brings soup and asks the question you've been avoiding. She was good at matching heart to capacity, and she guarded her fosters like a mother hen guards the foolish. Next to her, Dr. Amit Shah represented behavioral consults, a tall, lightly stooped 40-something, with careful hands and a precise way of speaking, glasses with thin black frames, wedding ring worn shiny on a fidgeting. Habit. He moved in adjectives like gradual, structured, and predictable. And beneath the clinical he carried the soft-spoken devotion of a boy who had once coaxed a terrified stray out from under a rusted car with balled-up bread and patience. Two more rounded the table, Trey Nguyen, mid-20s, community outreach, hoodie under a blazer that had borrowed its authority from somewhere else. He was a digital native whose kindness came wrapped in spreadsheets and social posts. And Mrs. Helen Whitaker, 72, silver hair and a classic bob, pearl studs, a cardigan the green of old libraries. She had poodles at home and a checkbook that could alter the weather of a shelter. She could be flinty when habit demanded it, but Lila had long ago learned that Helen's flint threw sparks toward warmth, more often than toward fire. A speakerphone in the center of the table reserved a seat for Dr. Howard Ellison. He had called in from the clinic between rounds. Lila opened. "We're here to decide next steps on the Depot 3 case. 3 German Shepherd puppies brought in hypothermic by Mr. Turner, currently stabilized at Riverside Veterinary. Options are intake to our facility with placement in separate fosters as available, or approve a temporary custody arrangement with Mr. Turner pending checks and support. Everyone's read the intake?" Papers rustled. Jack felt the hum of the building in his wheels, the faint vibration of dryers, the electrostatic hiss of fluorescent lights. Marisol leaned toward the center. "I canvassed," she said. Video at 0605 showed a slim female leaving a box. We located her at West Side Station. Rachel Goss, 19, no fixed address. She did not dump and flee. She stayed 2 nights trying to keep the pups alive with body heat and sugar water. She placed them by the depot where people would pass. She's now at a women's shelter. We'll coordinate mental health support. She asks for updates. She signed a statement relinquishing any claim if that's in the pup's interest. Naomi's shoulders eased a fraction. Context, the thing that turns judgment into discernment. Gordon's pen paused over his notebook, then resumed. He was very good at writing down mercy without letting it affect his math. Status of the pups? Lila asked the speakerphone. Howard's voice came clear and warm, an old radio that still worked. Temps normalized, glucose stable. They're eating slurry well and have responded to gentle handling. They'll remain hospitalized for 48 to 72 hours. They are litter mates, and that bond is helping their stress mitigation. Prognosis good with continued care. Care costs, Gordian said, not unkindly, but as a man reminding a room of gravity. Estimated remainder? We'll taper to outpatient quickly, Howard replied. I'll discount. And there's already a pledge from an anonymous donor, and here Helen looked studiously at her hands, to cover any gap beyond Mr. Turner's capacity. All heads turned to Jack, who had placed his VA card and a printed budget on the table with the sobriety of a man placing medals he had not asked for. Mr. Turner, Lila said, giving him the floor like a thing she trusted him not to drop. You're requesting to be designated temporary custodian, pending formal foster approval. Tell us how you plan to meet their needs. Jack sat a little taller. His voice was steady in the way of a man speaking to a patrol before a patrol step-off. I live in a small ground-floor rental on Blue Ridge Drive, 2 rooms, fenced yard, no stairs. I have a service ramp fitted, secured gates, and I'm buying 3 wire crates today if approved. I receive monthly VA disability. This is my budget, he tapped the sheet, with line items for food, routine vet care, training. I've already spoken with Dr. Ellison about follow-ups. I'll keep the litter together for now. That's important for their recovery, per his note and per Dr. Shah's likely recommendation. I have a feeding schedule drafted for overnight and day, and I've arranged with my neighbor, Rosa Alvarez, to help with late afternoon letouts on days when PT runs long. I've raised working dogs before, though not from 6 weeks, and I'm not too proud to take classes. He slid another sheet over. Here's my plan for enrichment, potty training, and crate rotation, so nobody feels left out. Trey, who recognized a man who came prepared when he saw one, nodded unconsciously. Gordon cleared his throat. And emergencies? Suppose there's a medical event and transport is required, you're limited. He didn't say in a chair. He didn't need to. Jack's mouth tipped at a corner, not a smile, just the ghost of one that had learned how to live in a hard neighborhood. I have a van with hand controls. It accommodates my chair and a large crate. I've done dry runs to Riverside Vet in 8 minutes from my address. If I'm physically unable to manage a load, I have 3 names on call. Rosa, my landlord, Mr. Dennison, and a fellow vet named Calvin who lives 2 blocks over and owes me 3 favors. I also have a Pet Tech First Aid certification from 2 years ago. It's expired and I've signed up to renew. Naomi leaned in, eyes bright. What about time? Shepherds from a rough start are a full-time job. Sleep schedules, socialization windows, bite inhibition, the works. Jack spread his hands. My time is what I have. The VA covers my basic needs. I don't have a 9 to 5. I do PT 3 mornings a week. The rest is this. And I won't separate them unless your behaviorist says it's in their best interest. He looked down at his knuckles, then back up. I know how it feels to lose a unit. The sentence sat in the room with its boots on. Helen's mouth softened. Naomi's fingers tapped once on the table, a little drum solo for yes. Gordon's pen hovered, then landed again. Dr. Shah adjusted his glasses. As a behavior consultant, he said, I'll note that littermates have pros and cons. Codependence is a risk, but given the trauma and their age, a short-term together plan with structured separations and one-on-one work would be ideal. Mr. Turner's schedule and willingness to follow a plan are positive indicators. He glanced at Jack. You'd need to keep an eye on resource guarding, fear periods, and ensure independent coping skills. No pair bonding that excludes the human. Jack nodded. I'll follow your lead. Gordon tried again. There's public perception. We assign 3 high-demand working breed pups to a man with challenges when we have vetted fosters waiting. Naomi didn't smile, but her eyes did a brief bright thing. We have fosters for bottle babies and couch potatoes, she said. We do not have many fosters who can give high-drive pups full present days and treat a training plan like gospel. And our waiting fosters don't have a budget sheet with line items and a van with hand controls. Also, if we separate now, we add 3 placements to our caseload instead of 1. That's 3 sets of check-ins, 3 sets of adopters to vet, and we cause stress when stress is the enemy. Lila held the room with a palm, her quiet an instrument that tuned everyone. Marisol, he's got community, Marisol said. I watched a barista step out of her doorway to a delivery cyclist offer her scarf, a clinic throw rules at the wall and choose compassion. People are already orbiting this case. We can either harness that or ignore it. The speakerphone breathed. For what it's worth, Howard said. They steadied fastest with his hands on them. Heat is heat, and they know his. Medicine is numbers, and so is mercy. Gordon pinched the bridge of his nose, long practice in the art of being the person who said the unglad things. Liability, he murmured. Always liability. Helen's pearl studs winked when she turned her head. I've lived long enough to know liability looks like a lot of things, she said, voice winter soft and good for making tea. Sometimes it looks like letting 3 babies grow up in crates in a noisy room instead of in a yard with sun. Sometimes it looks like telling a soldier he can only be useful to strangers halfway across the world, not puppies 2 miles from his porch. She folded elegant hands. I'll sponsor obedience classes, private ones. Silence collected like snowfall, each flake just a little temperature falling until the ground changed shape. Lila looked around the table, read the algebra of faces, and drew the line under the sum. Here's my proposal, she said. We approve temporary custody to Mr. Turner for all 3 pups as a bonded unit for the next 30 days. Conditions, weekly home checks from Naomi's team, a training plan, overseen by Dr. Shah, including structured separations, financial oversight to ensure medical needs are met, Dr. Ellison to coordinate. We notify the city shelter per protocol and hold a finder-foster agreement. If at any point we see red flags, we reassess and move to split placement. If all goes well, we reevaluate at 30 days for continued custody or adoption pathways. She lifted one eyebrow at Gordon slightly, a silent, let me keep my job while doing it. Gordon exhaled through his nose in a sound that meant I am not the villain and I am not the hero. I am the page that laws are written on. With Mrs. Whitaker's sponsorship noted and a budget review in 2 weeks, he said, I can live with that. Trey's thumbs flew under the table, not to post, but to draft a check-in template. Naomi's pen scratched OK in black capital letters on her legal pad, a word that had waited all morning to stand up. Lila turned to Jack. Mr. Turner, she said, letting his name be a kind of welcome, the center is prepared to entrust you with temporary custody under those terms. We'll walk this with you. Jack didn't look at the ceiling, but gratitude lit him from the chin up like a lantern pulled to life. He set both hands flat on the table, steady. Thank you, he said, and the words were not performative. They were the steady oath of a man who knows that yes is the beginning of work. I won't let you down. I won't let them down. You'll let them nap, Naomi said dryly, and the room's tension broke in a small, soft laugh that didn't cost anyone anything. Lila slid a thin stack of forms across. Then let's sign what we need to sign so the puppies never notice the bureaucracy. Outside the window, a sliver of cloud moved, and the light warmed a notch, as if the town had turned its cheek toward a better sun. The day the clinic said home, the sky over Riverside wore a better color, as if someone had turned the town a few clicks toward warmth. Snow still shouldered the ditches, but the plows had carved faithful lanes, and the pines along Blue Ridge Drive stood like veterans at ease. Jack Turner signed the last discharge form with a steadier hand than he'd used to sign anything in years, because writing this yes was the opposite of surrender. Dr. Howard Ellison handed over a packet thick with instructions and a thinner smile cut from quiet pride. Paula Keeley tucked a Ziploc of pre-measured meds into the side pocket of Jack's canvas bag, with the same practical tenderness she used for a sleeping child. Jaden hovered to make sure the heat packs in the transport crate kept their low, gentle promise. Tomas gave the crate a last check, the way one checks an aircraft hatch, palm flat, knuckles tapping, an old superstition that liked to pretend it was science. The 3 bundles inside were no longer the color of worry. Their noses were glossy black olives. Their ears had learned the beginnings of the shepherd's signature inquiry, and their eyes, dark, sensible, puppy serious, regarded the world like a room they might finally be allowed to walk in. In the van outfitted with hand controls and a single large crate strapped like a treasure chest, the rhythm of breath from the back sounded like a tiny engine rebuilt. Jack drove with a steady economy learned on ranges and rehab floors, feeling the slight variations of road through his palms, turning his head just enough at every glance as if to remind fate he was paying attention. His little house on the edge of the greenbelt had a sagging porch that looked better in winter light, a ramp he had stained himself the color of cinnamon toast, and a yard fenced with cedar that remembered hands in the height of last spring's grass. He'd spent the morning before the pickup, pushing furniture an inch here, an inch there, measuring crate footprints with blue tape like a general staging a campaign of naps. The living room smelled faintly of pine cleaner and new rubber chew toys. 2 wire crates waited against the wall, blanketed for den feel, and a third sat near the wood stove like a seat reserved for a guest of honor. On the kitchen table, a schedule had been written in block letters and pinned with a magnet shaped like Colorado. Feed, nap, outside, cuddle, repeat. Beneath it, a note in smaller print, remember to breathe. The van door sighed, and the crate slid down the ramp with a whisper of wheels on aluminum. Rosa Alvarez, the neighbor with the delivery bike and hands that knew how to offer without taking, jogged across the street with a wool beanie tugged down and a grin that showed all the ways a mouth can be generous. She was small and quick, work jacket splattered with paint she hadn't had time to change, and she had tucked a bag of rice and a stack of old towels under one arm, the currency of a D. Household that knows mess is not the enemy. Mr. Dennison, Jack's landlord, followed at a dignified amble, late 60s, tall in the way a man stays tall by minding his spine, paler than winter, with a plaid scarf that had been fashionable in 1978 and loyal ever since. He carried a roll of chicken wire and a bag of zip ties, as if he still believed there was no problem you couldn't fence in. From the porch next door, a thin boy of 9 with hair like a stubborn storm, Theo Patel, watched under the jurisdiction of his grandmother, Mrs. Patel, who was round in the manner of grandmothers who cook by instinct and fix fevers with cardamom milk. Theo's cheeks were smudged with sidewalk chalk adventures, and his eyes had the hungry shine of a child who has been waiting for a story and suspects it has arrived. Jack opened the crate door like a curtain on a stage and lowered one hand to the trio inside. The largest pup stepped out first, broad-foreheaded sable male whose paws still looked like he'd borrowed them from a bear, ear tips trying heroically to salute. He sniffed the threshold, pressed a nose to Jack's palm, and sighed, the kind of sigh a soldier makes when he sits and finally lets his armor notice the chair. "Buddy," Jack said, and the name sat on the dog like a well-cut vest. Companion, shadow, the one you ask how the day is going without words. The next out was the bright-eyed one with sunnier tan on her cheeks and the impatient trot of a creature who intends to make up for time lost in boxes. Her coat picked up light and threw it back, and her tail made a punctuation mark at the end of every thought. She nosed Jack's wheel, then his boot, then Rosa's hand, then the yard, as if conducting an inventory of blessings. "Sunny," Jack told her, and the syllables made a small lamp in the air. The last emerged cautiously, smaller than the others but composed, dark mask like a little domino, around eyes that read faces as if emotions were a second language she had been born fluent in. On her chest was the faint white coin of fur, a moon pressed in cloth. She leaned her head into Jack's wrist and then lifted it to study the trees, the house, the sky, storing them on some internal shelf she would later arrange. "Luna," he whispered, and the name answered back from the pines. The first circuits of the yard were a procession. Buddy with a low, purposeful lope, shoulders already promising the strength that would someday make him carry not just sticks but responsibilities. Sunny bouncing like punctuation, leaping at old snow as if to convince it to change its mind. Luna walking narrower paths, attentive to scent poems written along the fence, pausing by the woodpile to listen to the sap talk. Jack rolled after, hands light on rims, the chair performing like a draft horse on familiar paths. He kept his voice low and steady, offering the 2-word hymns that teach a language. Easy, here, good. When he said home, he felt the yard almost nod. The morning's training was democracy and poetry. Crates were introduced with treats and a blanket from the clinic that still whispered of heat and beeps and rescue. Buddy considered the crate, declared it acceptable as long as the door was not an insult. Sunny charged in and out like it was a portal to a better dimension. Luna stepped in, turned once, lay down, and blinked as if to load the new reality into memory. Outside, the first potty breaks were a clumsy ballet of sniff, circle, decision, with Jack laughing under his breath at the pomp of tiny lives performing ancient rituals. He clicked the latch on the side gate that Mr. Dennison had reinforced with his chicken wire and thanked the older man without ceremony. Men like them traded gratitude in finished tasks, not speeches. Mrs. Patel brought over a pot of khichdi steaming against the cold, rice and lentils and cumin, the smell of kindness that has economic sense built in. "For you," she said, patting Jack's shoulder, then, with solemnity, "and little friends later when doctor says okay." Theo, permitted a single pat by edict, crouched, hand held flat like a novice at temple. Sonny kissed his fingers decisively, and then sat, as if someone had whispered the word, "Sit," in a language older than training. Theo's eyes widened, and he looked at Jack as if miracles were contagious. Other offerings arrived on the porch not long after, as if the neighborhood had brewed a shared plan overnight. A stack of fleece blankets from the library ladies' crafting circle. They tied knots the way some people tie prayers. A box of puppy food bought with pooled tip money from Marty's diner. Marty himself, thick-set, tender-eyed, signed the card without mush because mush makes some kindnesses shy. A bag of toys that had belonged to a retriever named Duke who had graduated to softer days 2 summers ago. His owner, Mr. Alvarez, no relation to Rosa, lean and gentle, looked at the 3 pups with a small ache that tasted like remembrance and found it sweet. Midday napped the house. The crates breathed, the wood stove ticked. A winter sun slid across the floor in long, useful rectangles. Jack dozed in his chair with his feet on a battered ottoman. The sound of 3 distinct snores, Buddy's small freight train, Sonny's squeaky accordion, Luna's barely there tied, braiding into a lullaby that tuned his heart to a slower key. He woke to the world telling him the afternoon had turned, set out 3 bowls with measured meals, and watched them eat like a family at a table learning each other's jokes. Buddy steady, paced, not greedy, but thorough. Sonny trying to supervise everyone else's portion with the cruciform seriousness of a hall monitor. Luna slow, thoughtful, pausing between bites to look up and check that nothing had changed in the rules of love. Through it all, Jack practiced the soft hand that redirects without scolding, the calm correction, the praise that lands like a medal exactly when earned. By late afternoon, the yard had collected footprints in triplicate and a new geography of chew marks on 2 approved sticks. The air sharpened. The mountains dragged the light down their backs in gold strokes. A familiar car rolled to the curb, then a second, then the sound of a bike's freewheel ticked like a fast clock. Dr. Howard swung out of a dusty Subaru with the grace of a man who has learned to save swagger for doors that won't open. He wore a navy sweater under his coat and a scarf his daughter had knitted him too long ago to be stylish and too recently to be outgrown sentimentally. With him came 2 clinic volunteers, Naomi Brooks, foster coordinator turned evening doer of all things, curls tucked into a knit headband, warm brown eyes that measured puppies like a tailor takes measurements, precise, admiring, predicting growth, and Trey Nguyen in a hoodie under a thrifted blazer, slight, quick, a messenger bag packed with donated collapsible bowls and a printed handout titled First 30 Days, like a field manual bound by staples. Behind them, Sarah from the coffee cart arrived on foot, taller than the wind expected, chin up, cheeks pinked by cold and courage, a small paper sack of still warm croissants in one hand, and in the other, a shy wave that wanted to apologize for not having more, and also to promise she'd be back with less fear. Rosa crossed from her porch with a thermos, because hospitality is a muscle, and hers was fit. Introductions overlapped with sips of tea and the ceremonial exchange of treats. Buddy solemnly accepted Dr. Howard's greeting, the way a young private accepts a coin from a general, formal, wide-eyed, convinced of destiny. Sonny launched herself into Naomi's orbit, and learned in 1 minute that Naomi knew the exact scratch that turns a wriggle into reverence. Luna approached Trey, sniffed the messenger bag, seemed to approve of organized kindness, then sat, head tilted, as if reading footnotes in his eyes. Sarah crouched a cautious inch from Sonny and extended a palm that trembled, the tremble of someone for whom softness has been punished before. Sonny pressed her nose into that palm, then licked it once, and Sarah closed her eyes as if a seal had been pressed on a document inside her she'd thought too ruined to file. Dr. Howard did a quick once-over without making it a performance. Hand to ribs, glance at gums, the small murmured nonsense good doctors say, to tell animals that kindness is older than language. "Weight looks good," he said. "Eyes bright. You've kept them on the road." "The road kept us," Jack replied. "I just paid the toll." They stood in the yard with mugs steaming, the cedar fence catching the last sheets of light, as if they were laundry hung to dry. Buddy lay with his chin on Jack's boot. Sonny chased the world's smallest scandal, a drifting leaf, with missionary zeal, and Luna watched everything. Then came back to rest, her head on the spoke of Jack's wheel, like a pilgrim at a reliquary. Voices fell away the way voices do when a sunset has taken its place at the front of the room. The pines printed their dark lace against a sky rinsed in copper and rose. Someone, maybe Trey, maybe no one, said, "Huh," softly. The word people use when they see beauty they don't know how to explain without breaking it. Jack looked at all of them, doctor, neighbors, volunteers, a barista with a small brave hand, 3 dogs who had learned the shapes of safety, and felt something in him click into alignment the way a dislocated joint does under the right pressure. Pain, then relief, then a strange clean openness. He bent, pressed a knuckle into the soft hair between Buddy's ears, touched Sonny's cheek as she panted victory over the leaf, and smoothed Luna's brow, where the moon coin of fur glowed pale in the draining light. "I lost too much back then," he said, voice so quiet it barely disturbed the cold. "But today, I found a new family." The yard, which had learned words all afternoon, seemed to hear that sentence and lay down with it the way a good dog lies down when told, and the house behind them, small and honest, held the heat steady like a promise a man might finally believe. Sometimes the miracle we pray for does not arrive with trumpets. It comes wrapped in an old field jacket, in a neighbor's scarf, in 3 small heartbeats that refuse to quit. God's work so often moves through ordinary hands at ordinary doors. A soldier who will not look away, a doctor who opens the room, a town that learns a new word for family. If we listen, we can hear it in our own streets too. In daily life, miracles often begin with small choices. Keep a spare blanket or bottle of water in your car. Learn the number of your local animal shelter and a nearby clinic. Check on the quiet neighbor. Offer warmth before questions. You do not need to fix the whole world. You only need to be the person who stops, and God will meet you at the stopping. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us in the comments one small act of kindness you will do this week. If you believe God still moves through simple courage, type Amen in the comments. Subscribe for more true and uplifting stories of love, growth, and second chances. A short prayer for you. May God bless every viewer with eyes to see the need, hands steady enough to help, and a home brave enough to welcome the lost. May He pour strength into the tired, wisdom into the willing, and gentle protection over every animal and every rescuer. Amen.